Mergers and Acquisitions 2021 Rising Stars of Private Equity faced unprecedented challenges in the COVID era. I'm Mary Kathleen Flynn, Editor-in-Chief of Mergers and Acquisitions, and I'm excited to talk with some of the winners now. Cass Ziebel is a principal at Parker Gale Capital and one of Mergers and Acquisitions 2021 Rising Stars of Private Equity. Cass, I'm so interested in the fact that you were Parker Gale's first employee back in 2015, before they had even raised a fund. We were already starting to cover them, by the way. We've been covering Parker Gale since the beginning, and you've been there too. So tell us how you found Parker Gale and how you got into private equity.
Yeah, it's actually probably not that different from a lot of people in that networking is a super important component of this industry. It was different in that I didn't do the traditional 2 years of investment banking. So I actually started in deal advisory as an accountant. So I was very familiar with private equity in that world. I interned in private equity, and I got connected as the Parker Gale team was spinning out from Chicago Growth Partners. And they took a chance on me as their first associate, and I took a chance on them for their first fund. And here we are years later in Fund 2, and I rejoined the firm after business school. So it's been an interesting ride. There's 15 employees now, 2 more coming on. So it's been awesome.
One of the themes that we've been covering this year a lot is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and especially in terms of how private equity firms are beginning to really focus on recruiting and retaining diverse candidates. And I know that's something that you've given a lot of thought to as well. You want to share your insights about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think about that in 2 ways. The first is I was kind of that diverse candidate in some ways. I'm a female in private equity, and I'm also a female in the technology space. And I started getting into private equity by Googling what is private equity on my way to an interview through this program called Illinois Venture Capital Association Scholars, which is a program that is meant to widen the funnel. They are looking at diverse candidates. They're looking at people of color and women. And I was lucky enough to land an internship in 2011 that let me actually experience private equity at a firm called Prairie Capital in Chicago. And I learned a ton at that time of this otherwise opaque and non-transparent industry, and realized that I could do this job, I could do this work, and it gave me the confidence to continue staying in this space. Since then, we've supported internship programs like that are a great way to start people's careers. Illinois Venture Capital Association still does those programs. And also Avante Mezzanine does one. They have 45 interns this year, which is awesome. And just looking for internships is a very easy opportunity to get people who otherwise might not get that exposure very early in their career. The other thing I think about with recruiting is getting people on your boards or getting people at your portfolio companies. It's a great opportunity. Every time that we screen for candidates, for example, we're doing a search for a VP of finance at one of our companies right now. And we have asked very explicitly for a diverse slate of candidates, just to make sure from the very beginning that you are considering a wide variety of options. And I think just that simple ask can make a huge difference.
It must be a bit challenging. You know, Parker Gale is still a small firm, and as you said, tech focused. So, you know, can you say anything about how you're able to produce diversity when you have a small team?
Right, and I think what's helpful is that in some ways we are a small team, that from the very beginning, one of the dreams I got sold on is that we are doing private equity differently. And you might be familiar with that since you have been around since Parker Gale has begun as well. And I think because we've always had that mindset in the forefront, it's been really easy to have these conversations and keep them in the forefront when we're making decisions, which is the most important time to have that in the forefront of our minds. And I also think because we are smaller, it gives us the opportunity to not have to deal with the bureaucratic red tape of decision making and, you know, actually get things going. We also have 2 great people that are now that I rejoined on the operations side, very focused on talent and have built up hiring and thinking about all of those areas very explicitly with interviews, et cetera, that can really help with diversity, because those are what a lot of people think of as gateways. And the first step to diversity, equity, and inclusion is to look at those gateways. And for a lot of firms, that's hiring. And since we have spent a lot of time thinking about talent and hiring and kind of have developed a methodology around it, one of those focuses is, like I said before, thinking about diversity just like you would think about a lot of other parts of the candidate's profile from the very beginning.
And we're pretty much out of time, but I also just want to mention that one of the three co-founders of Parker Gale is Christina Hines, one of our most influential women in mid-market M&A. So I'm sure Christina, having her there as one of the founders, helps too.
That was one of my main reasons for joining. Yes.
At least on the women's side.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
All right. Thank you so much, Cass Siebel, and congratulations again on being one of our rising stars.
Thanks so much.
Luke Marker is a principal at GTCR and one of Mergers and Acquisitions 2021 Rising Stars of Private Equity. And Luke, you're also an expert in life sciences, and that's the field that you invest in. Obviously, that's a sector that's gotten a lot of attention during the COVID quarantine. Give us a feel for some of the deals that you've worked on, and maybe we can start with Maravai Life Sciences.
Yeah, great. Happy to do it. And Maravai, I think, is a pretty interesting story because they've been at the center of the vaccine solution for this COVID-19 pandemic. But really, the Maravai story goes back several years ago. Back in 2016, we partnered with our executive, Carl Hall, to build a life sciences company. And through a series of acquisitions, including a business called TriLink, which manufactures what's called mRNA. At the time, I had to spend a lot of time to understand what that was. Wasn't kind of common lingo. Today, it's central to the method that vaccines such as BioNTech and Pfizer's vaccine are used today. That company, through our investment and growth, was really well positioned to support a lot of these biotechs as they shifted from things like gene therapy to solving the COVID-19 vaccine last year. And I'm proud to report back that Maravai is now a critical input supplier to several of those vaccines. They have IP that is relevant in serving those companies, and has really taken the company to a new growth trajectory. We were able to IPO the business last year for 1.9 billion, and it's now a public company that continues supporting biotechs in their initiatives, both for vaccines, broader than COVID, also influenza, et cetera, as well as gene therapies.
Well, congratulations on the IPO. That must have been a gratifying exit, I'm sure.
Yeah, really exciting to be part of it, and especially given we were at the forefront of trying to solve a major pandemic at the same time.
Yeah, I'm sure that was amazing for you. So another company that you've invested in is Corza Medical Devices. Tell us about that one. Little different story.
Yeah, this was a new investment for us in 2020. Really exciting transaction where we actually brought together two different companies in a simultaneous merger to form what's now Corza Medical. So throughout 2020, we were in dialogues with a company called Surgical Specialties, which focused on surgical sutures and other wound closure products. We knew the CEO there. He served on another board within the GTCR portfolio company family that I also worked closely with. And through those dialogues, and actually an interesting carve out that came together, which is a product line called Tacosil, which is owned by Takeda Pharmaceuticals. We had dialogue in midsummer around the opportunity to merge those two companies and create a new business with global scale. Surgical Specialties was strong in the US and China. Tacosil had a direct presence in Europe, and merge those two companies, really use the existing infrastructure of Tacosil to then acquire and integrate what was really a product line and a sales force with Tacosil. And so that all came together. We signed the deal in the fall of 2020 and are off to the races now in 2021 with our new business, Corza Medical.
Wow, sounds like a complicated deal. So we've only got a few seconds left, but how are you feeling about M&A and private equity in 2021 in the life sciences sector?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement around life sciences, and I'm sure, as other folks have mentioned, it feels like the 2021 deal environment is also quite robust. Some sales were put on hold in 2020, and we see a lot of opportunity for new investments in 2021. I think the excitement around what these life sciences companies brought to solving the pandemic has accelerated enthusiasm for the sector. And we look forward to some really interesting opportunities for new investments here in the coming year.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks and congratulations once again to Luke Marker from GTCR for being one of our rising stars.
Thanks, MK. Really appreciate the time.
Amara Subasang is a principal at TA Associates and one of Mergers and Acquisitions 2021 Rising Stars of Private Equity. Amara, thanks for joining us. I know you've talked about how we're in a very competitive deal environment, and we were intrigued by your approach to it. So give us a feel for how you're handling all this competition.
Yeah, so the market is white hot, super competitive, and you really have to pick your spots. And so the areas where I've tried to lean in are scenarios where relationships matter. So relationships with the management team or relationships with the current owner really matter, aside from just price, because fighting in a price-sensitive market is very difficult. So I've tried to build relationships with executives over long periods of time. I've also tried to create a point of view or craft a point of view for companies that are really interesting. A good example of that is a company that we invested in earlier this year called Stackline that continues to be founder, management led and owned. And in that instance, relationship really did matter. And we came with a distinct point of view, which was backed by years of research and investment experience in related industries. And we showed through our actions and through our resources that we could be a value-added partner with supporting organic growth and also supporting M&A. And so those instances where that human contact, that human interaction really makes a difference, I try to identify those, coupled with the industries and companies where we at TA have a distinct point of view and pattern recognition around being able to measure future success.
So we've just come out of a period where, relationships were very challenged by the inability to meet face to face, through the COVID quarantines. So how did you develop the relationships and nurture them in that environment that we've had over the last year?
Yeah, it's been difficult and challenging. I think we have replaced a lot of in-person interactions with just more frequent virtual interactions, whether it's phone or Zoom or FaceTime, to create or manufacture that type of relationship building. In a lot of instances, we do have to travel, and sometimes those are kind of riskier situations, but we take appropriate precautions at the time, and we made the investment of going to meet with people in person because there really is no replacement for that. But at least for the starting relationship building process, Zoom is very effective, and virtual interactions have been very productive, not just for me, but I think for TA broadly speaking.
And you invest in tech-enabled and data-driven companies in your portfolio. And I think we've really seen a big push to upgrade companies of all kinds digitally. And that, I think some of that began before the COVID epidemic, but it's been accelerated by it. Give us a feel for, what trends you're seeing in tech-enabled companies.
Yeah, sure. I think COVID definitely has accelerated that adoption curve for a lot of companies that we're looking at and that are within our portfolio. I'm on the board of a company called Backstage, which is a two-sided marketplace for casting, for film, TV, commercials, and other media. And they connect thousands of content creators with hundreds of thousands of talent. Those can be actors, actresses, singers, voiceover actors, or models. And that company's growth has accelerated in the midst of COVID, which is exciting to see because their digital marketplace has replaced a lot of the kind of old world in-person processes that happened previously, more predominantly pre-COVID. So it's exciting to see that adoption. And also as a way to get people jobs that they otherwise wouldn't have in a very troublesome time is a really exciting thing to be a part of and as a board member. And then Stackline, I mentioned before, is an e-commerce data company. They also saw an acceleration of growth just given the end market. E-commerce now represents not just 5% of certain categories, but 20 to 50% of certain categories versus brick and mortar. And so you see that broader adoption curve and changing consumer purchasing cycles impacting a lot of the data software services companies that serve that end market. And there's a lot of beneficiaries as a result of that, which is exciting to see too.
Last question. Do you think we're going to see just a continued boom in tech-related deal making throughout the year?
Yeah, I think so in terms of technology, tech-enabled services, even companies that are not necessarily technology companies are becoming increasingly technology-enabled. Another one of my portfolio companies is Omnia Partners, which is a group purchasing organization serving state and local governments and also private institutions. It's one of the market leaders in the US. And they historically have connected hundreds of thousands of members, which can be the state of New York, the state of California, Harvard University, to thousands of suppliers. That used to be done with very limited technology. Now that company is utilizing it more and more from the sales cycle all the way through to operations and leveraging data in a new way, which was kind of accelerated over the last year and a half, which is also cool to see.
Well, it sounds like you're going to be very busy as all of these companies continue to adopt and upgrade digitally. Thank you so much for joining us, Amara, and congratulations again on being one of our rising stars.
Thank you.
Kevin Mulligan is a vice president at Monomoy Capital Partners and one of Mergers and Acquisitions 2021 Rising Stars of Private Equity. Kevin, thank you for joining us. One of the reasons that you stood out is your work on recruiting and retaining candidates at your firm, especially diverse candidates. And I do want to talk to you about that in a moment. But first, let's just talk a little bit about some of the deals that you've been working on this year.
Great. Well, first of all, MK, thanks for having me. So thus far this year, I've had an opportunity to work on transactions with both of the portfolio companies on which I covered. At Sportech, we ran a dividend recapitalization process in January of this year. We invested in the business in November of 2019, and in the first 12 months of Monomoy's ownership, the company grew its earnings despite the backdrop of the COVID pandemic and generated significant cash flow, which allowed the business to pay down its debt and provide an opportunity to return a significant amount of capital to shareholders within the first 14 months of Monomoy's ownership. Secondly, in the first quarter, I also completed a divestiture of Edsel Manufacturing's China facility. This was a non-core facility that allowed us to streamline Edsel's operations, make it a more efficient footprint, and position the business for growth going forward.
Sounds like a nice, busy year you're having in deal making.
Absolutely.
So as I mentioned, one of the reasons that we gave you the honor of being a Rising Star was your work on recruiting and retaining deal makers, and especially your work with historically Black colleges and universities. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, absolutely. So, having a diverse workforce in Monomoy has always been paramount in our recruiting process as we bring in new members to the investment team and across the Monomoy team in general. This year, we've introduced 2 undergraduate internship programs, and it's the first time that Monomoy has hired individuals directly from undergrad colleges and universities. And we focus in particular on historically Black college and universities and other underrepresented schools, with a goal of giving undergrads a good, broad private equity internship, giving them exposure to both investing as well as the operational angle that Monomoy likes to bring to our portfolio companies and our investment style, and positioning them well to develop future internship opportunities in their career as they continue in their undergraduate time towards full-time opportunities.
And you've also been very involved in mentoring other deal makers at your firm. Tell us a little bit about that. And also, if you have any words of wisdom to impart to other firms in the private equity industry that are trying to work in these areas, what would they be? What would your advice be?
Absolutely. So I think, developing a mentorship culture and an opportunity for the most junior members of the investment team and the team in general to feel nurtured and developed as they enter and progress in their career at Monomoy has been critical to us. And we do that both formally with mentorship programs for the interns or new members of the investment team, and also informally by trying to have a culture where people can stop by an office, swing by someone's desk, ask a question, and pick each other's brains to really spread knowledge throughout the firm. And I think that that's been critical in retaining our talent and can be seen in how Monomoy is able to promote from within and people spend their careers at the firm. In terms of words of wisdom, I think it's being open and being sure to communicate even as the work style in which we operate changes. COVID has had all of us working remotely for significant periods of time, and maybe remote work will become more prevalent going forward. And making sure to use video calls and proactive outreach to members of the team, even outside of deal conversations, is a great way to make sure that you maintain that culture of being a mentor and connecting with people on a personal level as well.
All right, thank you. Let's also talk about how you've worked with portfolio companies on some of these issues and on governance in general, ESG issues.
Absolutely. So as we talked about, the internship program is part of Monomoy's social efforts in terms of ESG. With portfolio companies in particular, the sport tech business that I mentioned previously, we invest in the business that had previously been family owned and operated, and it didn't have a corporate governance structure in place. As part of the board, and in particular the audit committee of the board, I was involved in creating that corporate governance structure so that there was a proactive and formulated way for the management team to come to the board and receive approval for capital requests, other growth opportunities, important customer contracts. That was particularly important for the business in the past 12 months, as they've experienced unprecedented demand and been growing very quickly, and had a process in place in which they could utilize the board to make quick data-driven decisions.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Kevin Mulligan, and congratulations once again on being a rising star. Kevin Mulligan from Monomoy.
Thank you so much, MK.
Forrest Wilkinson is a principal at Apex Partners and one of Mergers and Acquisitions 2021 Rising Stars of Private Equity. And Forrest, thank you for joining us now. I want to talk to you a bit about some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that you've been working on. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about some of the deals that you've been working on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and very happy to be talking.
Great. So what kind of deals have you been working on lately?
Yeah, the most recent deal that I worked on was the sale of one of the divisions of our portfolio company, Quality Distribution. It's a division called Quality Carriers, and we had been running the business alongside its sister division, which is Boasso, for a number of years since we invested back in 2015. Both those assets have different strategic priorities and will run rather separately. Both asset light businesses, but we had the view that we could unlock additional value by separating the two businesses and pursuing those strategies kind of one-on-one. And so kind of worked with CSX, which is a large railroad in the US, over the last several months on the sale of that division to them. Unlocked a great price for Apax and the investors that are selling, along with a lot of synergies for CSX to go out and buy quality carriers, while at the same time paying a dividend to the Apax funds and refinancing the capital structure of Boasso so that we can go out and execute on M&A, which is a big part of that investment thesis. So that's taken up a good bit of the last few months, as it was a double-sided carve-out transaction, and always takes a little bit longer to negotiate such deals, but that's what we've been working on.
Sounds like nice and meaty, and like perhaps there are add-ons coming. Is that the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So Boasso operates both in the US and in Europe. We've done a bunch of M&A in Europe and have an extensive pipeline there. And I think part of what this transaction unlocks is management's opportunity to focus more on Boasso and more on the international market, where there's a ton of M&A to be done, and entering into a few other verticals that we've been investigating for Boasso. So hopefully it's both a win for CSX, who bought quality carriers, and for the Apax funds with Boasso over the next 24 months or so.
All right, great. Well, switching gears a little bit, want to talk to you about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a theme that we are covering a lot this year, and I think the private equity industry is finally making some progress in that area. And you, in particular, co-founded a group at Apax called Thrive. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Apax Thrive is an employee support group at Apax geared to LGBT individuals at the firm. It's the first such group that we've had, and kind of hatched the idea last year during COVID when we were all separated and unable to come together. Apax has a lot of LGBT staff around the world, but no kind of cohesive group that brought them all together. And so we decided to do that, not just to create that community, but also hopefully to add value to the careers of the people at Apax who fall into the community. And so we've kind of just started now the in-person events and planning some things that are going to happen this year with the eye to enhancing the experience for LGBT folks at Apax, but also trying to help them network externally to other firms and kind of create a trans private equity network of people in the community that can come together and build their networks across firms. And I think a lot of that will hopefully add value to the people who are already in the industry, but also encourage people who are not currently in the industry to come and show that Apax within that is a great place to work, which I believe it is.
And do you have advice for other private equity firms looking to reach out to the LGBTQ plus community and support employees now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is to make a statement about it because it's very difficult to understand what differentiates private equity firms externally. Most of the websites look very similar. They all seem to do the same thing. And the one thing you can't really get a good sense of externally is what the culture is. And I think a lot of people are operating under the idea that finance is just universally not as welcoming to LGBT individuals, and I think the opposite is true, especially for the firms out there who have really stepped up and done something. And Apax is one of those places. So you make a splash, you make a statement, then people can identify, oh, this is something that matters to this organization. They donate money to it. They hold events. They have a support group. And there are a lot of people at the firm who identify that way. And so I think it's a great way for another firm to do something similar.
Well, I like that idea, especially, private equity firms are competing for talent. So this is a way to help differentiate and, put out the welcome wagon, so to speak. All right. Thank you, Forrest Wilkinson, and congratulations again on being one of our rising stars of private equity.
Thank you very much.